How many of you recognize this cute face? If you do, you know this is Ralphie from the 1983 Christmas movie entitled The Christmas Story. And the theme behind the whole movie is Ralphie is trying to convince his parents, everybody around him, that the only thing he wants for Christmas, you remember what it was a Red Ryder BB gun. And along the way, every person responds to him with the same warning. You'll shoot your eye out. And that's the way the whole movie goes, multiple times. Kids, you'll shoot your eye out if you get a BB gun. You know, sometimes warnings are very, very hard to accept and to understand. And they really don't come across to us in a very positive way. Sometimes we realize the warnings too late. It could be like the lady who was driving down a winding country road, and as she came to a curve, here come a car sliding around the curve in her lane. And as he slid past and they barely missed, he yelled out the window, "Pig!" And she, that struck her so wrong, she yells back, "Jerk!" And as she rounded that curve then, she looked, and there in the middle of the road, the reason he had swerved was a large pig. Yeah, sometimes the warnings just come too late. For the last 3 weeks, we've looked at the words of comfort that Jesus offered to his disciples in that upper room the night that he was betrayed, the day before he would be crucified, and as he was trying to prepare them for a life of living in between. We talked about those words of comfort of do not be afraid. Then we talked about don't stop trusting me. And then last week we talked about you are not alone. You have the Holy Spirit. But now we move to a section of words of Jesus that we would characterize as words of warning. And like I say, words of warning usually are not as much fun, but they're just as much needed, if not more. So we're going to look at John 15, and we're going to read a lot of scripture today. So we're going to start off by reading the first 6 verses of John 15. It begins this way. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does not bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I've spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he is like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. Jeff Walling tells the story that once he and his family were in Bangkok, Thailand, and they were getting ready to go out into the city, and they were going to go through the market. And as they went out, the driver said to Jeff, who had his 2 children and his wife with him, looked at his little 4-year-old boy, Riley, and said, he is the type that people will steal. And Jeff was like, what? What are you saying? Yes, he said, yes, they like children like him. The people who steal children, they like ones like him. And he explained to Jeff that it was his gold curly hair that made him attractive. So you can imagine the fear that this put into Jeff's heart. He didn't mention it to his wife because he knew she'd have him back on a plane going back to America right then. But he said he made it his mission right then that he was not going to let Riley out of his sight. And he told his son over and over, do not let go of my hand. And if any of you have ever been to a foreign market, you know the confusion. It's not like walking into Walmart or someplace like that. It's the confusion of all these different vendors and aisles and booths and curtains hanging, and there just seems to be no order, but there's stuff everywhere. And as they went into that, and Jeff was holding on to his son Riley's hand, it became too much of a temptation for this little boy. All of these things to explore and adventures to take into. So as Jeff stood there looking at something one time, his wife said, "Where's Riley?" And Jeff said, "He's right." And he said for the next 5 minutes, it was the most horrifying experience of his life. As he and his wife and some others started to help to try to find this little Goldilocks that was lost in this area. They began to call, as you can imagine, "Riley, Riley," and it was going up, and there was no way to spot him in all of this confusion. But 5 minutes later, they found Riley in one of the booths behind the counter, playing with a child of one of the shopkeepers. And parents, if you've ever been in that situation, you know that's one of those moments where you don't know whether to hug them or kick them. And he just decided to gather his son up in his arms, hug him tightly, and just say, "Don't ever do that again. Don't ever let go of my hand." Jesus' message to his disciples this evening, was the same thing. Don't let go of my hand. You must stay connected to me. Now, 7 times in the first 8 verses of John 15, he says that key phrase, "Remain in me." It's easy to see that this is the theme of what Jesus is trying to accomplish with his disciples in this warning. You cannot survive spiritually if you do not stay connected to me. Jesus uses the ancient metaphor that's used multiple times throughout the Old Testament of the vine, the branches, and making a connection. And he goes on and uses this metaphor and gives us some reasons why we should remain in him. Let's look at those. The first one, it says, "Remain in me because I am the true vine." Israel's relationship with God had more ups and downs than a ride on an amusement park roller coaster. They were close to God, they would wander from God, they'd return to God, they'd wander away from God. Over and over and over. It's like they just couldn't help themselves. That when things were going great, they had to find some way to wander away and let go of God. And then the bad times would come. See, the relationship between God and his people was a covenant relationship. In other words, they had come together. They had made this agreement. It was a choice that they made, that they joined together and made a covenant. They were all in agreement. When you look in the Old Testament, for the whole Bible, all that matters, one of the strangest stories there, to me, is the story of Hosea. Hosea was an Old Testament person that God had come to him and said, "I want you to marry," get this, "I want you to marry an unfaithful woman. She has been unfaithful. After you marry her, she is going to remain unfaithful. But I want you to marry her." And this was God's way of trying to illustrate to the nation of Israel that you're unfaithful to me, but I want to show you how far I will go to bring you back. And Hosea marries this woman. She does exactly what he knew she would do. She was unfaithful. She ran off with multiple other men. But he would always go and call her back. He would bring her back. Hosea 2:5 says, "She said, I will go after my lovers, who give me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my oil and my drink." What prompts a follower of God, one who has a covenant with God, to swing back and forth between love and obedience to disobedience and unfaithfulness? And let's make no mistake about it. We're capable of doing the very same things. We do the same type of things, that we chase after other passions. We'll sing on Sunday the praises of God. And then on Monday, we'll use that same very voice and we'll curse people. We'll lie. We'll gossip. We'll slander. We'll lift our hands in praise to God on Sunday, but then on Monday, we'll lift our hands to steal, to strike, to abuse. And we know the reason is because we chase imitations. When Jesus said in John 15:1, he says, "I am the true vine," that implies that there are false vines. And this may be the whole reason that Jesus is talking about this here at this point. It's talking about the false prophets, the relationship that Israel had with God. that it's not going to be a true relationship, but all those who put their faith in Jesus Christ are the ones who will have a true covenant relationship going forward with God. We chase imitations. We chase knockoffs. Like Hosea's wife said, I will go to my lovers. And for some reason, we chase these knockoffs for money, for power, for popularity, or for instant gratification. And we do that. And Jesus is warning his disciples, do not do that. Stay connected to the true vine. That's what Jesus called himself. Well, I want to look at another one here. Remain in me, Jesus says, because my Father is the gardener. When Jesus used this metaphor in this part of the world, at this point in history, as soon as he talked about a vine and branches and fruit and a gardener, everybody understood completely what he was talking about because it was so prominent in that part of the world. For me, I need to do a little research. I don't understand exactly what he's talking about here, so I have to look. The gardener was not a hired hand. He was the owner, manager. He had one goal in mind, and that was to take the vineyard that he had, and he did everything he was capable of. Everything that it took, one goal, to produce the most fruit from the vines. And whatever he had to do, that's what he did. And what he did, the tool of a gardener, a master vineyard keeper, was he would cut. He would cut away the branches that were not producing so that the nutrients could go to the branches that were producing. But that was not the end. He would also, the vines that were producing, the branches that were producing, he would cut away some of the buds so that it wouldn't just be a lot of branches, it wouldn't just be a lot of buds, but all of the nutrients would be centered, focused on producing grapes, large bundles of grapes. I know some things that are changing in my life, the interest I have that show, yes, I'm getting older. If you'd have said to me 20 years ago that I would enjoy sitting somewhere on our back porch and watching the hummingbirds, but I do now. We have hummingbird feeders and we keep them filled every day because the hummingbirds will come if you do that. And I really enjoy watching them. But something else I've learned that I've enjoyed, and that's knockout roses. I love knockout roses. And so I've planted knockout roses at our house. Now with the hummingbird feeders, we've done a much better job because we've kept them cleaned and filled and the hummingbirds keep coming back. With the knockout roses, I made a mistake. I planted them and then I haven't pruned them. So this year, my knockout roses are big, a lot of branches, but it's not as many roses. And I will have to do a better job. I'll have to make some tough cuts when it comes time of the season to do that and cut the bushes back to make them eventually more productive. These are serious words that Jesus speaks of the pruning and the cutting away. And they're not said to make the disciples worried that he's saying, you're going to be cut away and thrown into the fire. Jesus already said, you are clean. You have been made clean by my words. So he's not trying to worry them. He doesn't want them looking at each other and saying, just like when he said, one of you will betray me, and they begin to say, is it I? Am I the one that's going to betray you? No, he's not talking to them. This is probably, like I said, we're talking about false prophets, Israel, things like that. He doesn't want Christians to worry as well. When we read something like this, he doesn't want us to question whether the grace of God can save us because we made a mistake or we were lazy this Sunday or we didn't fulfill something. He's not wanting us to question every time we do something wrong that we're going to be cut away. But he is talking about chronic sin. The ones who have disconnected, get this word, the ones who have disconnected from God, who no longer have an influence of God in their lives. They become unattached as well. This is a great, great warning to a nation, to an individual, to a church, that we must stay connected to the vine. Now he talks about the gardener prunes the branches that are connected. Look at Hebrews 12, verse 7. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father? None of us would self-prune. None of us would bring things into our life that, as he says, brings discipline to our lives. So the gardener has to do that. He does this for us. Now, and it's adversity that comes along, and what it teaches us. A few verses later in chapter 11, in verse 11, he says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. What trials do you face? What trials do I face? Are they the same thing? Are yours more severe than mine? Those are all good questions, but at the same time, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we have to appreciate the trials that we go through. For if we do not appreciate, I didn't say enjoy, but appreciate what they're working in our lives, then we never learn the lesson. We just become bitter and we blame God, we blame other people. But if we recognize that God is using these to make us better people, more in touch people, more productive people, we can appreciate what's going on. I'll tell you, to tie this right to what we're going through right now, I do not know what the value of the pandemic is going to be. Dolan and I were sitting in my office this week and we were just talking, and he said, I really wonder what effect the pandemic is going to have on the church long term. Will we ever get back to the strength and numbers that we were? Will offerings, we'll be able to support missionaries, and will people come back eventually? These are all answers I don't know. But I do know this. Each and every one of us will have to answer that question whenever this is over, or how things get back to a new normal, whatever it is. That each and every one of us will have to answer the question, how did this make me a stronger Christian? Or did it draw me away from God? Each person has to answer this. Well, there's another thing that Jesus teaches us about remaining. He says, remain in me to bear fruit. Many times in the scriptures, throughout the Old Testament and New, the same thought is said two ways. Said from a negative side and from a positive side. And the same thing is true here. Verse 4, look at that again. He says, remain in me and I will remain in you. And this is the negative. He says, no branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. Now the Greek word here is not just, yes, I know God. Yes, I know who Jesus is. But to remain means to take up residence, to live with, to move in. It's not a casual phrase, but it is a relationship. It is a covenant that was made. And if that doesn't exist, that type of connection, the fruit-bearing capability doesn't exist, or it will be lost. One of the huge, huge mistakes that a nation or a leader makes, listen to me on this and see if it doesn't apply to us today, is that we try to solve the problems of our nation or the problems of the world without the influence of God. And the United States, richest nation in the world, in history, we have tried to solve our problems. We have tried to solve problems of the world without the influence of God. And let me ask you, how is that working out for us? In the last 50, 60 years where we've removed God from all parts of public life and government. Are we a kinder, gentler nation? Are we more compassionate? Do we treat each other with respect? Or do our leaders rip us apart because all they care about is winning? You know the answer. It's obvious that there's lost respect. There's no gratitude, lost gratitude in our nation, but rather entitlement and that says, you owe me more. Are we more? Are we happier? Are we at peace? You know the answer, and it's no. And as individuals, not just a nation, but as individuals, the answer seems to be that when I'm bored or when I'm hurt or when I'm down or I'm not happy, it seems to be buy the next thing, find the next person, go on the next adventure. And it's not a coming back to God, but it's always to move forward and find something else that will make me feel better, to make me happier, to fill this void in my life. And we just seem to never understand that those endeavors are doomed without the connection to God, the vine. And it's like trying to turn a light on in a room, and the light just will not come on. It won't light up our life, and we put a new bulb in, or we change the type of bulb. We fiddle with the socket, we fiddle with connection. And I don't care how much you work or how much you change until you realize that you don't have the lamp plugged in. It's not going to light up your life. It's not going to light up the room. And not being connected to God and trying to move through this life and accomplish great things without the influence, without the power from God, it's going to be that way. I'm sure you're like me, that after this last storm, this last hurricane, that it blew some trees over in your neighborhood. Or as you drive to work, you can see a tree that has been broken off or blown down. And you know what? For a little while, those trees remained green. Even though they were blown over or huge limbs broke, they remained green. But you knew they wouldn't stay that way. And in a very short time, they began to wither. They began to draw up. They began to lose their color. And now they're a dead color because they are dead. Because they become unattached, disconnected from the roots, from the vine, from the tree. Jesus phrased it also in a positive way. He said in verse 5, I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. He will bear much fruit. And some people think that Jesus was talking about evangelism, that we will win more souls, and that's the fruit that will be produced. And that is a wonderful, wonderful thing, and that's what I hope is happening all over the world and in every life of every Christian. But if we follow what Jesus talked about bearing fruit in other places and how he meant it there, he's talking about a personal growth. He's talking about righteous actions, a righteous life. Jesus said it. Paul said it. Remember the fruit of the Spirit. John the Baptist said it. When he questioned the crowds who came out to be baptized or to hear him preach, he questioned their motive. And I just want to read this section for you because it tells us so much. In Luke 3, starting with verse 8, it says this. This is John the Baptist. He says, produce fruit in keeping with repentance. Sound familiar? And do not begin to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. For I tell you that out of these stones God can raise up children for Abraham. He's saying don't rely on your heritage or who your mom and dad was or what was true in the past. He said this is a new relationship. He goes on in verse 9. He says the axe is already at the root of the trees, and every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. Does that sound familiar, what Jesus had just said? In verse 10 he says, what should we do then, the crowd asked. John answered, the man with 2 tunics, 2 coats, should share with him who has none, and the one who has food should do the same. Tax collectors also came to be baptized. Teacher, they asked, what should we do? Verse 13, don't collect any more than you are required to, he told them. Then some soldiers asked him, and what should we do? He replied, don't extort money and don't accuse people falsely. Be content with your pay. Do you get what John was saying, what Jesus is saying, what Paul was saying? He was saying, Produce fruit in how you live. Let us see the change. Let me see the change. There should be a change in your life. If you're connected to the vine, there will be a change and you'll produce fruit of righteousness. Now, how are we going to do that? If you've always been a selfish person, how are you not going to be a selfish person? If you're a person who took advantage of people, how are you going to stop doing that and start giving to people? There's only way. There's only one way, and that's staying connected to the vine. Recognizing that our power comes from God, from our relationship with Him. It is through the power you draw that constant connection that it's the only way we're going to accomplish it. Let's be honest here. None of us are good enough by ourselves to produce fruits of righteousness. We're just not that good. But the power that flows from the vine, from Jesus to us, enables us to do that. And if you try to do these things, no matter how hard you try, you'll find yourself making them works-based religion, or trying to earn God's favor, or look better than enough people, do better than enough people that makes us look good as we think in God's sight. And you will have no joy in doing these works. It's only through His power and being connected with Him will you find the joy in doing these things. Well, let me wrap things up today. Words of warning are tough. Sometimes they're hard to hear. Sometimes it's hard to take in because we just don't think they apply to us. Like I mentioned, this pandemic again. This is a time where we're living in a time of warning, because we're told every day something else to be afraid of, some other step that we need to do to keep ourselves safe. And you and I know that is a tough balance to find and live at the same time. And we know we have to be careful that we don't become people of fear, that we can take cautions, but we don't become people of fear and ruled by fear. And we don't pass this on to our children, that they're scared to death, and we don't scar them for life after Corona by the way we scare them now. I'll tell you, it's a tough balance to find. Very tough. But Jesus, as always, finds the very proper balance in how to warn us, but to also show us a gateway to happiness and joy, purpose, and fulfillment. He lets us know that the warning of do not be disconnected from Him. But then He points out that it leads to an awesome life, to stay connected to the vine. There's a great life waiting for those who will stay connected. Connect with Him and then stay there. Who will take Jesus' hand, never let go, because you know He's never going to let go of you as well. If there's somebody watching today and you find yourself living in this place, connected, disconnected, living in fear, or trusting in God, will you do something about that today? And if there's any way that we as a church, myself individually, Eric, Greg Webb, Dustin, any of us, will help you in any way possible. And just let us know any way we can. I want you to think about something else as you gather there in your home with your family, no matter if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or a dozen, that you get ready to take the Lord's Supper. And I want you to think about this thought as you take the bread and the juice today. That this is a way that God, that the Son, Jesus said, I will connect with you through this. Every week when you take the Lord's Supper, there is a connection with me, because you're remembering what I did for you. So today, when you take, will you remember how God has took your hand through the sacrifice of His Son, the giving of His Son, so that we all would have the opportunity to be saved. God bless you. Have a great day, and let's serve the Lord the very best that we can this week.